Everybody, I'm Matt Valley. Welcome to episode number 154 of the Rock and Roll Research Podcast, where we share the super cool backstories and side gigs of the insights and analytics pros that you trust. Very special episode today. Why? I'm welcoming Gabe McElwaine to the podcast. Hello, Gabe. So, how do I know Gabe? I know Gabe because of this really cool WhatsApp community called Punk MRX, which is a really awesome place. It's a place that you should check out. Gabe is one of those people that just had some great commentary. We kind of took it offline and started chatting, and then we saw each other at IIEX here not too long ago in Washington, D.C. And here we are, we get to continue the chat. So very excited about that. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Gabe. Gabe is currently at a company you may have heard of called i-Genie. That's i-Genie, i-Genie.ai, right? Of which Stan and Nathan is associated. And they're doing some really amazing stuff. They built an insights platform for understanding consumers, really meeting them where they are at rather than creating all of these artificial conversations. People are already out there. They're saying lots of things about your brand and in lots of native places where you can find them, and they're taking great advantage of that, doing a lot of great work, answering a lot of the questions around measurement and innovation and measuring the brand and all of those things that you might use more traditional methods for. So really cool stuff. Before that, Gabe has been with some other really great companies, with like Ramesh and Experian and NPD back in the day. And he's also involved in the Insights Career Network, which is very cool. But one thing I learned about Gabe that turned into a brief conversation that we're going to expand upon today is that he started out his career in the record business. And
Don't we all?
it's something I wish I had done. So I'm going to live vicariously through you today on the podcast. So welcome to the show, Gabe.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. And yeah, I think actually I think we first hit it off on the Punk MRX thing when I told you I worked next to Peter Mengede from Helmet.
Oh, that's right. That's right. It was the helmet connection. Very cool.
That's right. Yes. And not I'm just gonna break my back from dropping all these names, but that
Yeah,
was
I mean, you
that
started
that
right
was at
out.
Sonic Youth's record label. So yes, Blast First Records
Oh,
back in 1980, 80 something or other.
very, very cool. So before we jump into it, I do want to mention that I have a new sponsor on the podcast. I'm very excited about. It's a great company called Insight Sutras. They are an operational partner and analytic partner to a lot of great research firms and consultants in this space. I happen to know the founder quite well. His name is Winfred Sampson. He's based in India. We worked together for years. I've been advising as a member of the board, which is very exciting. And I'm very pleased to say that they are sponsoring this episode of the podcast. So check them out, insightsutras.com. Happy to chat about them, whatever. Just let me know. But with that, Gabe, let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to start, and maybe, you know what, we're going to do it a little bit different. So we usually talk about the research career first, but maybe there's a flow here, right? You started somewhere else and somehow that transition. So
Yeah.
give us your career journey.
Yeah, so I graduated from college, and my first job out of college was working in a warehouse, which made my parents oh so proud. And yeah, I was working in a record warehouse of all things, where company was importing lots of 12-inch and DJ vinyl for DJ specialty shops. So this was the early '90s,
Yeah.
when that was just, rave culture was exploding everywhere and sort of taking off here in the U.S. And I thought, what a great way to get free records to fuel my DJing career and just my record collection. So there you go. So yeah, so that great liberal arts degree I had really paid off for the first few years. So I was definitely learned a lot about the music business from an independent sort of distribution network and kind of worked, through that kind of culture, that subculture, sort of selling to DJ specialty shops, learning how to order and keep inventory in place, and how to build relationships. One of my best friends I actually met through that, and he and I are still great friends to this day. We've been to each other's wedding. He was the best man at mine. So how do you build up that kind of culture of friendliness and outgoingness, and which in the long term set me up for a career in sales and market research. But so I
Okay,
did that for a few years.
pause there. Pause there. Let me hold that thought. So, you mentioned you were also DJing, right?
Yes.
You were
Yep.
getting you're getting your supply from your day job.
That's right. Getting high off my own supply, as it were. Yeah.
Very nice. So tell me a little bit about the kinds of events you're DJing.
Yeah, a couple of buddies of mine and I hosted a series of nights in New York City for, geez, like 11 years.
Oh,
We were all music industry folks in one way or another. So one was an A&R guy for Virgin Records, and another one was he worked for Sire Records. And so we all just sort of came together and pooled our resources, decided that we would just do these little underground nights, which were kind of all the thing in New York at the time. So we'd
yeah.
do little bars, little venues that were like 100 people or something like that. But because of like the industry connections that we had, we would get just crazy at the time, crazy ass DJs to come and play for us for beer money, basically.
Wow.
So like Fatboy Slim was probably like the biggest one we had, played for like,
Oh, that's
in a room that was probably like the size of my living room here, and for like 50 people, and he played for basically vodka and beer and whatever else we could empty out of the bar. So we did that for quite some time. It was great. We also did another night which was all very chill, like ambient kind of stuff,
sure.
yeah, so it was a great way to just sort of like socialize and network, and just have a place for friends to come down and have a place to kick back without like too many knuckleheads being in there. So I was always trying to figure out ways of like, how do I use one thing to fuel something in alternate, which would, sort of come back to kind of help me out in the long run. And yeah, so it was did that for almost 11 years. Did that,
Oh,
and
so cool.
yeah, it
Cool.
was a lot of fun, and never had, and that led off into like some other things, like doing some stuff at like the Javits Center here in New York
Oh,
with
yeah.
Fader magazine, playing drum and bass for Crazy Legs and the Rocksteady crew, and having them break dance in front of a crowd of like 500 people. Like, it was some really cool stuff came out of that. So yeah, it's those are some great moments in my early days. Maybe not the smartest choices, but choices I wouldn't take back for sure.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. So how does that transition work then? How do you find your way
Yeah.
into insights?
So I started my own. Out of that, I started my own distribution company, which lasted for a couple of years, and then I started working with from that. Started working with sort of more traditional kind of physical music distribution companies. A company called Rykodisc, who was
Yeah.
like the first label that put their entire catalog on CD. And so I started working there, and basically just started working my way through the independent kind of music label sector side of things. So I worked there, and from there I worked at a company called Palm Pictures, which was founded by Chris Blackwell, who was the guy who founded Island Records and discovered Bob Marley and U2 and all that stuff. So he had his own company called Palm Pictures, where I met the Marley family in their little back room they had, which smelled, as you might not be surprised, a lot like reefer, marijuana, whatever you want to call it.
Shock.
Uh, yeah, exactly. And then I translated that gig into, I worked for a record label, an electronic music label called Ultra Records, and I ran their entire kind of sales function there. And
Yeah.
as head of label sales, even though it was not, we weren't doing like top 20 Billboard, though we did chart a couple of things in Billboard. We got a couple of Billboard Top 100 back when it meant something.
Yeah.
Um, but from there, I was just like, I would get these Nielsen Soundscan reports that would just tell me, oh, we sold 6 of this compilation in Kansas City. And I'm like, that's great. Who are these people who are selling, or buying this stuff in Kansas City? Like, I just want to know who these people are. And I was just like, God, I wish there was like a way to find this out. And I went to I went to a music conference in 2001, and lo and behold, there's a guy there named Russ Krupnick from the NPD group, and he was talking about exactly like we have all of this consumer purchase information on like demographics and like who's buying like the new Missy Elliott album or whatever, the new U2 album, and like we have all this stuff about the brands. Like this, I was fascinated. I was just like, holy crap, this actually exists. Like this thing, I was like, who are these people? I'm like, oh, I can actually figure this out. And this was the time when this is the rise of Napster and everything else, and all the all the digital downloading platforms, Pirate Bay, and all those other things. And I kind of see the writing on the wall that physical selling of physical products in the music business was going to take a serious downturn. So I was just like, so I started asking him for a job basically. And about 2 years later, I came on board at NPD Group to help them sort of build out their relationships with the record labels and the retailers and all that stuff. And that was 2004, I think. And so here I am, still here 22 years later. So yeah, so that's how I got into the music industry. Complete like happenstance. As I've learned happens to a lot of us in the business.
Yeah, no, I mean, usually you hear like, say somebody gets onto let's say the supplier side of the industry. It might be that they worked for, I don't know, a CPG manufacturer or something.
Right. They work for Unilever, or they work for P&G or something.
Exactly. So it's sort of like plucking from the industry in which you were consulting, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I had some industry knowledge, but it was like I had no idea like, what like a T test was or like any of this sort of stuff. So it was just kind of like learning on the fly, which is, where I think I tend to do my best work. But yeah, I mean, it was a great kind of introduction into market research because NPD was doing consumer research, they were doing point of sale research, they managed their own panel, they were doing custom research. So I was sort of able to start like piecing things together, and they were working across, every industry where like someone was pulling out a credit card and paying for stuff. So it was, it fueled my kind of like curiosity about like how businesses run, and that was one of the things I love most about like the insights industry, especially being in sales, is that I can be talking to a electronics manufacturer, and then a bank, and then a
Right.
CPG company, and then like a beer company, like in one day. And it's just like to get that sort of breadth of knowledge about kind of like what companies are thinking about, and is unique. Like there's not too many other businesses where you can do that.
Yeah, totally true. So tell me a little, because I mean, Stan has obviously been a very public figure in this industry for decades, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and so when he retired from the brand side, I know there was a lot of interest in, seeing what Stan would do next. And I know that he's involved in i-Genie, and it's making a lot of noise, right? I heard a lot of
Mhm.
people at IEX talking about i-Genie. And so tell me a little bit about what you're doing over there.
Yeah, i-Genie is really interesting. I've been in the research technology side of the market research industry for about 8 or 9 years now, and because I find it really interesting. There's a ton of ways of utilizing all these technologies out there to sort of understand consumers a little bit more in detail, or a little bit more easily, or a little bit more accurately, right? And so I've been with a bunch of startups, either as an advisor or as an employee, or kind of first past the post sales sacrifice. um, and it's not often you get to say like, oh, I'm going to a company that's been founded by like a 66-year-old Indian guy. It's very interesting background and a very interesting kind of take on it, because a lot of startups are fantastic with like thing that they're trying to achieve, but they kind of miss that business acumen, right? So Stan Stanudaton, he ran Unilever's entire CMI team for 10 years globally, right? He ran Coca-Cola's one for 15 years. And so you have this sort of like ingrained knowledge of like, this is what brands actually want to see. This is the blind spots that they have. This is what they actually need to understand. And that really fuels a lot of what we're doing at i-Genie, which is,
Sure.
yeah, I'm not going to go here and dump all over surveys or focus groups or anything like that, because they all have their place. But like when you're looking at people in their sort of natural environment now, which is by and large online, that's where you're really seeing like those need states, right? Like what are they looking for when they're searching? What are they talking about with when they're on social media, what are the sort of the things that are like that they're thinking about, or how are they interacting with your product, things that they want to learn about, like all those sort of things. Like those are the things that are really critical in sort of getting to why people are purchasing things, why they aren't purchasing things, what are the issues that they have. And we do have a saying here that like people don't have a lot of time to talk to you, but they have a lot of time to talk about you. And that's the piece that we're kind of capitalizing on there. And it's really resonating. Like we're not trying to replace the survey mechanism that has served companies really well for a long time, but giving them an alternate view of what's out there and what's going on in a much more reasonable time frame, right? Like to understand what people did 6 months ago isn't really going to impact you too much. Understand what they did a couple weeks ago and how that impacts your brand and what can you do to fix that. That's where the real impact is.
Right, right. And I mean, it just feels like the time is really right for the work that you're doing because data quality, as you know, is fraught. I love surveys too, right? I love qualitative research. It's part of
Yeah.
why I'm here. But the data quality questions are ever more concerning. And so if you are starting from generally a different base of data, uh, you have other things to work out, right? But you're not kind of mired in the standard questions around fraudulent responses and AI based response and all.
Yeah, it's like how much time do you want to spend figuring out which one is fraudulent? B, like, are you even sure that you know which one's fraudulent? And then even if you don't go down that far, like, how do you filter out? How do you know which half is the right half and which half is the wrong half? And
Right.
and then like the other premise is sort of like assuming that everyone goes on and does a survey legitimately or goes to a focus group and speaks honestly. That person who goes through a 10 question screener in a 20-minute survey and gets paid $1.25 if they're lucky, like is that really like getting you the representative person who you want to sort of identify with your brand? Same thing with a focus group, right? Like people go into focus groups, that's great, you get great granular information from people, but there's always someone who dominates a focus group. There's always like people are gonna sit there and feel judgy, like they're being judged, or they're not gonna say like, oh, I do have this rash on my neck, like now that you mention it, like so there are things that get filtered, right? And I think what a lot of like i-Genie does and a few other like kind of more behavioral oriented platforms do is they remove that kind of filter, right? Because you go on and search for something like give the rash on the neck thing. I don't have one for the podcast group out there, but you're going to go on there and say like, how do I get rid of this rash on my neck? It's really itching me and it's bothering me, and oh, it's got scales on it, right? You're gonna type that into search because you want that answer, right? You may
Yeah.
not do it on social. You probably won't do it on social. You may look in Reddit or something like that. But what i-Genie does differently is triangulate a lot of that data, right? So we're not just grabbing from one source. So that person who does have that rash on their neck, yeah, they're gonna go on search, but that person who wants to understand like what are things I can do for oily skin, they're going to go on social and go through like a bunch of influencer posts and stuff like that. So
Right.
so it's really trying to meet people where they are.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. All right. So let me ask you this. So you've got kind of a non-traditional, not that there is a traditional introduction to the insight space, all sorts of different answers. But yours is quite unique. So how do you feel that has served you? What did you learn from sort of coming from outside of this space and moving in?
Yeah, I think it's when you start out at smaller companies, like I did when I started my original career, you realize that people are parting with their money and they've worked hard for it, and you're trying to give them like the best possible reason to do so, right? And I think that's kind of you know fed me well, at least from like kind of like how do I approach working with clients in market research, which is just like behind every delayed meeting or procurement issue, there's still a person back there that's trying to figure out like the best way to like spend money and trying to just be really empathetic with them. Like I think that's one of the things I've learned, is if any of you go on my LinkedIn profile, the first thing it says is like sales without the ick, right? It's just like there's no reason to be like pressuring people into making quick decisions if they're not comfortable with it, because they're not going to come back, right? Like, yeah, you might get that quick that quick dopamine hit that all the salespeople are into. But it's not going to come back, and it's not going to give you that valuable long-term relationship. So I think it's like that. it's that understanding that like you are asking people to do something and they're not robots, and you want to give them the best reason to do it, and then just being as AJ Kieran's would said, being a good human, right? And just engaging with them. So I think that's really helped me sort of build some really great relationships that have lasted a really long time in this business, and which selfishly does help me when I move roles, and I can call up someone at company X or company Y and be like, hey, I got something for you, and they'll listen, right? And I think it's that kind of like thinking a bit more long term, and just being just being a personable human being, I think is just what's served me well.
Yeah, cool, cool. So I love that you quoted AJ Kieran's there. He has been a
Good guy.
guest on this podcast, right? Uh, he was a former radio DJ,
Yep.
and an awfully good one, judging by his voice, and he's a really fun guy to talk to as well. So yeah, good
Yeah.
call out, good call out. Okay. All right, Gabe. So, this whole space is changing so rapidly. i-Genie is part of that change. I know that AI is embedded into a lot of what you're doing. But you're sitting here now and you're looking a little bit out into the future. What do you see?
Yeah, I think every year, and I make a joke about this with most of my friends in the market research industry. There's some great market research freak out, like that. Just it happens every year, right? And
Yes,
it's like
it's
it's
true.
fraud. It's I mean, and I'm not saying it's not warranted, but it's like it's fraud. It's
Synthetic data,
it's
it's
synthetic data. It's
spam.
AI, right? And
Yeah,
so, and I get it, right? Because like it's a new tool, it's scary, but I've been in this industry long enough to have seen like that transition to online surveys, right? From paper
sure.
surveys. I mean, hell, I worked at Experian, and
Yeah,
they had bought Simmons, which we all remember from paper diaries, right? Write down what you did today, basically. And then they also bought Hitwise, which was an Australian cookie tracking
yeah,
company, and they were trying to mush the two of these things together, right? So I mean, I've seen I've seen it all, like in that regard, and and I think we always find a way to figure this out, right? And this is not to minimize people who are getting downsized at brands, and all the kind of consolidation that's going on in the market research business, but there are always ways to kind of figure this out. And I'm a firm believer that like you know the tools out there or if they're used responsibly, which is a big if for some bigger companies, if they're used responsibly, really do unlock a lot of potential for us to understand the people that are our clients or we're trying to market to better, how to get them. Because look, we're in the business of giving companies insights to help them get consumers to spend more money with us, right? Like that's what they do.
yeah,
So how do you understand consumers a little bit more? How do you do it more accurately? Get rid of that kind of spray and pray methodology. And I think there's so much opportunity out there. I think what we will see, going forward is, there are companies like i-Genie, and I'm going to selfishly promote this, where we're using AI in a way that's not just, as Stan would say, putting pink lipstick on a pig. I don't know why he always picks pink lipstick,
yeah.
um, but because a lot of these AI tools are basically doing things like we're helping you script surveys faster. Great. We're helping you sort of like take all those verbatims that you're getting and make sense of them in a way that would take you months to do as a researcher. Great, that's fine. But still the fundamental issue is that like these platforms are still doing that, like asking questions and getting answers. And if you go back to what I was saying before, like people always put filters on that sort of stuff. So I think
Sure.
the future of AI that's going to last is going to be with companies that understand how to apply the real benefits of AI, like the ability to just ingest loads and loads of data, and
Sure.
then give us something to work with to apply our human skills, which are like critical thinking. How does this work strategically for me? What does this mean for my client? How do I incorporate this narrative into everything else that I know about them? And I think
Sure.
that critical thinking aspect and that strategic thinking aspect is the part that's not going away. Hopefully not until I retire. But I think that part is not going away, and that is, to me, that is the great opportunity around artificial intelligence. So that being said, I recognize there's a lot of disruption that goes on with this, and I think companies that learn how to help their clients through this, and we work with brands pretty much exclusively, so it's functioning. how do you function as that seventh or eighth person on the insights team who's no longer there, right? And how do you help them do that? So I think it's, just trying to make sure that we understand that like technology is still technology. Humans invented technology, so it's up to us to figure out how to leverage it, and how to make the most sense out of it.
Yeah, sure. Well said. Love it. Okay, so Gabe, we're all indulging in media, right? We make our choices for good or ill. Sometimes they're somehow made for
Or
us.
we have our choices made for us for good or ill.
Exactly. Exactly. So if you think big broad question here, Gabe, what media are you consuming for insight, inspiration, or enjoyment?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because what I've always turned to is music,
Yeah.
which I'm sure comes as a complete surprise of what we talked about for the last 20 minutes. But it really does come down to that. And so for me, it's, yeah, I'll read the Atlantic or the New York Times or Fox Business just because I want to see the counterbalance. But like, so I'll get that. But like, if I'm trying to just focus or just sort of like disconnect, or just kind of get into my own kind of like headspace and figure things out, like it's all about music. So
Yeah.
me and SoundCloud, me and Spotify, we have a long history together, and I'm probably one of the few people who still I love my satellite radio. I've been a Sirius XM subscriber for 25 years now. So to me, it's like if I don't have to go make conscious choices and I don't want something algorithmically given to me, I
Yep.
will go fire up the XM.
Yeah, I could see that right now. I feel like I'm a little bit in a rut and want to discover new things, or at least have them be served up. I don't feel like doing the work to uh, curate what I want to listen to, but I want to be surprised. So that's probably something I should.
Yeah, because like, Spotify is very good at that, but it's like it's so, and I know they've got some new tools you can do to kind of get this, but it's so basically focused on like, all right, well, if I want to hear, this band is going to give me like, in those 40 songs it puts out, it's going to give me 5 or 6 songs. And I'm just like, well, I don't want to hear that band. I just want to hear stuff that's like that band. Don't stop giving me those
Yes,
things and don't make me
yes,
skip over it, right? So sometimes I just, and this is probably, because I'm a kid of the 80s, I just want like somebody to just kind of like spoon feed me some stuff. I'll make my own, I'll make my own choices.
exactly. Cool, cool. All right. So you said the magic word, Gabe. It's music. So you know what question is coming now? I'm very curious about your answer to this because we've
Yeah,
talked
this
a lot of music, but not the specifics. All
Yeah,
right.
so this is this was hard because we were talking about this before we talked, and it was like it's like I knew the first couple, but then the third one I was just like, well, what am I giving up by like by selecting this last one? And that was actually a really interesting thought experiment because it was almost like picking your like favorite children. Like I was just like, how do you do this? So
Great. And
um,
you will continue to think about this after this episode. I'm certain of it. Maybe you'll email me in a few weeks and say, oh, you know what? Wow, I screwed up. I totally forgot about this album. Okay, so just to reiterate, the question is, right, you're stranded on a desert island. You have three albums of your choosing to keep you company for the rest of your days. What up?
First one, New Order, Power, Corruption, and Lies. One of
Very
the
choice. I like.
perfect perfect album from beginning to end, but
Yeah,
not the American version, which came with Blue Monday at the end, which was not on the original version. So I'm being very specific about that
sure.
because it just doesn't belong there. But anyway, New Order, Power, Corruption, and Lies, perfect album. Second one is Cabaret Voltaire, Microphonies. They are, for those of you who don't
One.
know, they were like one of the original kind of progenitors of punk and industrial that came out of the Sheffield, UK scene. This was like their first kind of like real foray into like danceable but weird electronic music.
I, I
Great, great album.
I feel like Graham from Punk MRX is going to be disappointed in me that I wasn't familiar with that to begin with. But
And the third one, and this was so hard. So Underworld, second toughest in the infants. It has the best 20 some odd intro minutes to an album out there, and just like picks up like kind of where I dropped into like the sort of techno and rave kind of uh,
yeah.
experience, and just went from there. And it's the one that has the track that everyone knows from Trainspotting. So um,
Ah, right, right.
yeah.
Okay, okay. Hey man, I gotta listen to that. Those are some really interesting choices. So I've got a couple of new ones to listen to, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, good. So yeah, so those would be the three. And apologies to all those other albums I left out. Still love you guys.
All right. Well, let's get back to one quick question before we wrap up. One quick question, because we started talking about this before we started recording. This is the question for which I have quantitative data because I have over 150 guests. They gave me three albums each time, so I have over 450 observations. There is a very clear number one band that has been mentioned the most times. Can you guess what that is?
Band who's been mentioned the most times. I
And
mean,
artist.
I'm gonna be so basic here, and it's got to be the Rolling Stones.
Hey, that's a really good top 10, yes. But it's the other one. It's the Beatles.
Okay, I was like, I was trying to not be so obvious with my choice and so reductive, but well, hey,
Now,
that's
what's
what I.
what's nice is that it's a whole bunch of it, right? So this person will say Rubber Soul, this person will say Sergeant
Right.
Pepper's. It's kind of all over the board. But
Well, it's kind of not fair because like they had a pretty strong collection of like albums that like would be someone's favorite, right? Like, I mean,
that's
there's definitely a good 7 or 8 albums in there you could see like being like most people's favorites. So you aggregate that, yeah, it makes sense.
for sure. As a postscript to that, I'll say if you look at the top 10, uh, Insight's people really diverse, as exhibited by the top 10 most mentioned artists. It's like maybe 8 or 9 different genres that are represented in the top 10. It's really something else.
That's interesting. Not surprising, but yeah.
So very cool. All right, Gabe. This has been a great chat. I definitely want to continue this conversation sometime. We could talk a little bit more, get some more name dropping out of you from your record company days. So
Yes.
let's make it not be too long. Maybe at this conference coming up soon. Who knows? Well, let's make it soon. And a quick thank you again to Insight Sutras for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Thanks so much, Gabe. Talk soon. Rock and roll.